What should you do if you're stopped for suspicion of driving while intoxicated? First and foremost, understand that anytime you're driving a vehicle and an officer stops you and smells the odor of alcohol, you are almost certainly going to be investigated for driving while intoxicated. So what can you do in that circumstance to not further incriminate yourself? First, understand you're under no obligation to answer questions. Now, I understand that that's hard to do. I've been saying this for years, but when I was stopped for speeding last year and the officer asked me where I was coming from, I answered. It's kind of hard not to answer those questions. Understand if you've been drinking and they smell alcohol, you're in a very different situation. I would not answer questions about where you're coming from, whether you've had anything to drink, and very importantly, what time was your last drink? Because what time was your last drink is a critical fact that the prosecution will use to do what they call retrograde extrapolation. That is, if they get a breath or blood specimen sometime later, they'll use retrograde extrapolation and this time of last drink to say what you were at the time you were driving, which is what they have to prove. So don't give the officer information. You can politely decline to answer questions. You can't really say, I'm not answering questions without my attorney present. You could, but it's really not going to have any effect other than you're not answering questions, because your attorney doesn't have a right to be there on the side of the road with you during that investigation. But what you can do is say, I have a friend who's an attorney and they told me not to answer any questions. That's great. Or you could say, I just don't want to answer any questions. Or you could say, I'm pleading the fifth. It doesn't really matter what you say, and you're not really pleading the fifth. But the point is, you're not answering questions for the officer. Now, that doesn't mean the investigation is going to stop. The officer does have a number of things that they can do. First of all, they can ask for your license. So in that way, you have to identify yourself. They can ask for proof of insurance. Now, typically, they have a database that they will just look into to see if you have valid insurance on the vehicle or if the vehicle has insurance. Whether or not you answer questions, the officer can have you step out of the vehicle to do field sobriety tests. The way the officer is going to administer those tests, it's not going to sound like a request. It's going to sound like a requirement. The officer will say, I'm going to conduct a series of tests, or I'm going to do some tests on you. Doesn't sound like a question, but understand you have the ability to say, I would rather not perform those tests. You don't have to give any reasons. If you wanted to, you could say, I don't trust those tests. I've heard bad things about those tests. But at the end of the day, all you need to do is say, I am not going to do those tests. Again, it doesn't mean the officer is not going to arrest you if they believe they otherwise have probable cause to do so, but it keeps you from providing information against yourself, including how you look or act on those field sobriety tests. I do a lot of public speaking about driving while intoxicated, and I have people from the audience who are completely sober come up and take the test. It is surprising, or perhaps not that surprising, how easy it is to fail these tests. So just because you're sober doesn't mean you're going to pass those tests. My advice is don't give any statements. Don't do any tests. You should otherwise be cooperative, polite. Don't agree to give a blood specimen. Don't agree to give a breath specimen. That doesn't mean if they go do their job, get a warrant to draw your blood, that you should fight them on the blood draw. But make them do their job. Time is passing, the burden's on them. It is their job. There's no other investigation you could possibly think of where you would expect an officer to rely solely on the suspect to give them all the information. It's their job to go out and collect it. Let them do their job. Ultimately, the less information that you give the police, the better off you will be, and the more we'll be able to defend your case. This video was made in response to a question we received on this channel. If you have a question about criminal law in Texas or federal criminal law, drop a comment below and we'll be sure to answer that. You can also check us out at versestexas.com.